By the winter of 1885, every open-fold sheep pen in the Windrock Valley had lost half its flock or more to the wolves that came down off the ridge when the elk thinned out. Mercy Odell's had not. She had built her pen underground, a sunken yard cut 4 feet into the hillside, roofed with pole and sod, with a single narrow entrance a person had to stoop to pass through. The valley had laughed at that. Garrett Sewell called it a widow burying her own flock before the wolves could bother. By the time the wolves had cleared Sewell's open fold down to scattered wool and bone, no one in Windrock was laughing. Months earlier, no one believed a hole in the ground would outlast every fence in the valley. Mercy's husband Amos had died in a rockslide the spring before, driving strays back from a summer range he'd always sworn was safer than it looked. She kept his shepherd's bell, the one he'd hung on the lead ewe every season, on a peg inside the cabin door where she saw it going out and coming in. She didn't speak of him much. Grief in that country was carried in the hands, not the mouth. By July she'd sold his saddle horse and decided that the open-fold pens every other rancher built were a bet against wolves that the valley kept losing. She started digging in August, cutting the pen into the hillside itself rather than fencing flat ground, reasoning that wolves hunted what they could smell, hear, and see coming, and a sunken yard, with one narrow entrance, denied them 2 of the 3. Garrett Sewell rode past and didn't dismount. "Wolves go over fences, same as under them," he said. "Digging a hole just means your sheep drown in the first hard rain." Ansel Corwin, who held the note on half the valley's spring loans, put it plainer outside the bank. "A pen's supposed to be seen and counted, not hidden in a ditch. How's a man to know what he's lending against?" Mercy didn't argue with either. She'd already worked out which forces would decide whether her flock lived through the winter, and neither man's opinion changed them. Scent, sound, ground, cover. She said the words to herself the way another woman might say a prayer, because out here they amounted to the same kind of protection. Her first attempt failed within 3 weeks, and it failed for a reason rooted exactly where she should have expected it. Ground. She'd cut the sunken yard on a slope that looked dry in August, and the first real rain pooled at the low end faster than the runoff channel she'd dug could carry it off, turning a third of the pen floor to standing mud the sheep wouldn't stand in. She stood at the fence rail looking at it a long time. "It didn't fail because wolves got in," she said finally, to the girl sitting on the rail behind her. "It failed because I didn't ask where the water wanted to go before I decided where the sheep would stand." That was her niece, Dovie Odell, 11 years old and living with her since her own mother had gone east for work the winter before. Dovie kept account, not because anyone asked her to, but because she liked numbers and liked having something that was hers. She'd started tallying the flock morning and night in a scrap ledger Amos had once used for feed accounts. Mercy hadn't thought much of it until the day Dovie said, "That's 4 mornings running we're short the same ewe before noon, then found again by dark," and Mercy realized the girl had noticed a pattern in the flock's movement that mattered more than any fence repair. She recut the yard along the natural grade instead of against it, running a drainage channel to the low side and packing the floor with gravel under a layer of straw so water passed through instead of pooling. The pen held dry through September's rains. That solved one problem. It created another. A pen cut into a hillside and roofed with sod held scent inside it far better than an open fold ever had, which meant a wolf working the wind line at night could smell sheep long before it could see or hear them, and would test the narrow entrance for weakness on scent alone, night after night, whether or not it ever got through. The bank's note came due for inspection that same month. Corwin's spring loan required proof of flock count sufficient to secure it, and word had reached him that Mercy's herd was housed where no honest man could verify it. He sent a rider, not himself, a young clerk named Fitch, who walked the pen with a tally book and told Mercy flatly he'd be back before the note's winter review to confirm the count held through the season, not just on a fair afternoon in September. "Paper counts don't secure a note," Fitch said. "The bank needs to see the flock standing after real weather, not before it." That was the threat's second shape, no longer a deadline on a loan document, but a man with a tally book who would decide whether Mercy kept her flock and her land by what the winter did to her sheep before he came back. It was the drifter who told her what the pen still lacked, and he told her without meaning to teach her anything at all. His name was Cole Bannister, and he came through in October with a rangy black dog and no wagon at all, offered to muck stalls for a meal, and worked without complaint, which was itself a kind of information. He studied the narrow entrance a long moment before he touched it, the way a man does who has stood in a gap like it before, waiting. "Your dirt and your drainage will hold," he said, "but a pen this quiet works against you as much as for you. Wolves test by sound as much as scent. Silence at that entrance all night tells them nothing's watching it. You need something that breaks that silence on your terms, not theirs." He showed her hanging a line of loose tin scraps and a length of dried rawhide across the entrance path, low enough that nothing could pass without setting it rattling, and training the dog to answer that particular rattle and no other sound, so a false alarm from wind wouldn't wear the animal out chasing nothing. Mercy asked him, one evening, why a man who understood wolf behavior that well was traveling alone with nothing but a dog instead of holding a place of his own. He didn't answer for a while, then, had a flock in the Bighorns. Built the pen right by every measure but sound. Wolves worked it 3 nights running in dead quiet before I ever knew they were testing it, and the 4th night they got through before the dog woke, lost the better part of 40 head in an hour. He said it flat, the way a man says something he's already grieved through. I don't build quiet anymore. He never spoke of it again, and Mercy never asked him to. But from that week the tin line hung across her own entrance too, and the dog learned its rattle before the first snow. The wolves came the 2nd week of December, a full pack pushed down off the high country by a snow deep enough to have already cleared the elk out ahead of them. Mercy heard the tin line rattle a little after midnight, 3 nights running, exactly the testing pattern Cole had described, and each time the dog answered before anything could press further. The 4th night the pack came in earnest, pressed by hunger past caution. Ground held, the sunken walls gave a wolf nothing to leap from, no running start the way an open fence offered. Cover held, the narrow entrance let only one animal tested at a time, and the dog met each one there instead of being spread thin around an open perimeter. Scent had already drawn them in from a mile off, same as it always had, but scent alone had never been the thing that got a wolf through a gap. Only sound and ground and cover decided that, and all 3 held. But holding the pen wasn't the same as holding the valley, and Mercy hadn't accounted for where the 4th force would strike instead. The same deep snow that pushed the wolves down had also stranded Garrett Sewell's open-fold flock 2 miles off, his own dogs run ragged and losing ground, and it was Sewell himself caught out past his fence line trying to drive strays home when the pack cut between him and his own cabin. Cole heard it first, the dog's rattle answer breaking into a different, sharper bark that meant more than a test at the entrance. He and Mercy took lanterns and the rawhide and tin line itself, torn down and carried as noisemakers, out toward the sound. It was the sunken pen's own dog, trained to answer one particular signal and holding its nerve where an untrained animal might have bolted, that helped drive the pack off long enough for Mercy and Cole to reach Sewell, get him inside the pen's narrow entrance where the wolves could only come at him one at a time, and hold there until the pack gave up the chase before dawn. Sewell did not thank her that night. He didn't have the breath for it, sitting inside a pen he'd once called a widow's grave, watching wolves pace outside an entrance too narrow and too well worn for them to press. But he sat there until light came, and he watched Mercy's flock standing whole in ground he'd sworn would drown them, while his own fold 2 miles off had already lost count of what remained. Fitch rode out from the bank 9 days later, delayed by drifts on every road into the valley. He didn't need his tally book long. The pen stood, mud-splashed and torn at the tin line but unbreached, every head of the flock accounted for and standing, while the open folds he'd passed on the way in showed scattered wool and worse in the snow. He confirmed the note secured without asking Mercy a question she'd feared he might. The bank's interest in how she kept her flock ended there, resolved not by argument, but by the winter itself having already made the case. Garrett Sewell didn't make any speech about the wisdom of underground pens. He simply came by in January and asked, quietly, how deep to cut into a slope like his, and whether the drainage mattered as much as she'd made it look. The emotional payoff came the following spring, when Dovey Odell, 12 now, and steadier, hung Amos's shepherd's bell back on the lead ewe herself, for the first time since his death, having earned the right to be the one Mercy trusted to walk the flock out to summer range. Mercy watched her go, the bell's sound carrying the same as it always had, only now meaning the flock was watched by someone who understood exactly why. The technical payoff she gave once, plainly, to Dovey that same afternoon, because she wanted the girl to understand the mechanism, and not just the outcome. A wolf hunts by nose first, but nose alone doesn't get it through a gap. Ground that won't give it a running start, cover that lets you meet it one at a time, and sound that tells you it's there before it's already inside. That's the whole of what stopped them, and any one piece missing would have let the rest fail too. The thematic payoff arrived in the change of talk around the valley. What Garrett Sewell had once called a widow burying her own flock, he now called, without apparent irony, the Odell fold, and pointed newcomers toward the hillside cut instead of the open fence line. The legacy payoff came 3 years later, when Dovey Odell, 15 and tending a second sunken pen of her own on the valley's north slope, walked a skeptical young rancher new to the country along her drainage line, and told him precisely what Cole Bannister had once told a widow who hadn't asked to be taught anything at all: a quiet pen isn't a safe one, and the wolf that can't be heard coming is the only wolf that ever gets through.